Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my first book, The Green Queen from Java. It's a novel, it's a tale, a yarn intended to entertain you. Yes, it does reflect my experience of falling in love with Indonesia, my experience of falling in love with an Indonesian lady, and my increasing awareness of the paranormal and black magic, or some might like to say my descent into madness. But it is just a novel. Any resemblance to real people is completely unintentional. Yes, it's based on my experience, so yes, it's based on people I've met and know, but amalgams or caricatures of them. I do mention real people and real-life celebrities and hope that they, along with anybody who believes they've identified themselves, will forgive me. Maddie's nene had taught her various Kajau and fasting techniques, of which Maddie favoured total abstinence for 24 hours, nugebling. Maddie is also not permitted to eat a variety of foods, along with her Islamic abstinence of pork. I had said that I would join Maddie in her fasting. I'd already identified that I should fast on my Javanese birthday, which is Minggu Juluwangi, and somewhat auspicious. It's the holy day dedicated to Dewi Dano, or the lake goddess, so Pa Anggabaya was right, I am from water. Unfortunately, despite not struggling during Ramadan, I simply didn't have the willpower for Javanese fasting. Indeed, I embrace Ramadan fasting with zeal, never stealing a snack when no one is looking, as I've seen so many Indonesians do. Just as Indonesians never believe me to be Muslim, even when convinced that I am, they still find it incredible that I should fast. Nevertheless, each time Maddie Neglebling fasted, the possession would go for a while, and my powers increased dramatically. I suppose the lack of belief that I should be a Muslim and take it seriously reflects the few Westerners in Indonesia who take their forced conversion seriously. I have never seen another bule in a masjid, apart from a young Australian tourist I met near Sanur. I also remember, only weeks after Professor Darwin's conversion, him ordering Hawaiian pizza with real ham in a bar on Jalan Fatalayan. When I questioned him, he told me that it was what was in our hearts and how we led our lives that mattered. Profound thoughts indeed. Of course, Professor Darwin's conversion to Islam is another of those diversions, which maybe one day I should write about, but whilst terribly amusing, adds nothing to my tale. I call my new skills powers, but to a large extent, all that was increasing was my understanding of what was happening to us, ability to predict what would happen, not really seeing into the future, simply identifying patterns and extrapolating them forward, and explaining what happened and why it was happening. Nevertheless, I was aware of some powers that I had, and my confidence was increasing that I could use them. A little like my mother's, my powers were either restricted to our immediate problems, or I had no desire to try them out in another situation. I had been warned by Allah that I should not get involved in what I didn't understand, and though I thought of offering services to other bules, just the removal of unwanted spirits from houses or people, not changing the future for good or bad, Allah did not seem impressed. I now understand why, but at the time I could not fully appreciate the reason. I had learnt that the first thing you do when you become aware of a ghost or ghosts is to talk to them. When I knew their presence not to be a positive force, I would at first speak to them in an arcane language and use commands. This does not work anything like as well as speaking normally and with compassion. You don't need to talk out loud just in your head, although sometimes actually speaking the words helps. Despite many Kajau and Dukun believing that it's best to use ancient Javanese to communicate, I am not alone in having found that ghosts can understand any language, although it is possible that Dukun can communicate to a wider range of ghosts. Once you have opened a channel of communication, ask the ghost their name. Maybe it was my lack of experience, but the first name I get rarely seems to be correct. Ghosts are believed to often lie to try to trick the living, so maybe it is simply due to this. Or those sending ghosts instruct them to trick you. But somehow I believe it's my lack of experience. Or maybe ghosts don't often lie, despite many believing that they do. It is simply that you misunderstand them. One only has to try to decipher the allegories of Victorian Romantic paintings to understand the difficulty in comprehending the past. And I also have a different culture to comprehend. Just as in the world of the living, being able to use someone's name is the first step in establishing an empathy and being able to communicate. But in the spirit world it is more important, because knowing the name enables you to focus energy on a human or ghost. Of course, I had no such problems with my mentor Frank. He had simply come to me and opened me up to his realm. A useful typology in keeping me grounded is provided by Alain Kardec, the founder of Spiritism. In his book Spiritism, he describes 3 levels of possession or obsession. First, simple possession. The spirit does not hide or disguise its presence, so that the host is aware of it. Often this is a result of jealousy or revenge, and the reasons will be made known to the host. Nevertheless, the host can appear mentally ill and suffer from low self-esteem. Secondly, fascination. Although the spirit still does not hide or disguise themselves, the host experiences what the spirit wants them to and will attempt to destroy other sources of information. This may result in the host being urged to behave in ways in which they would not normally, sometimes with catastrophic effects. This is mostly associated with personality disorders and drastic behavioural changes. And thirdly, subjugation. When the spirit takes control of the host, and the host is being used as a vessel for the spirit's wishes. Neither I nor most spiritualists consider this final stage to be demonic possession, but it would be a framework for what others consider to be demonic possession. Thinking of what has happened to Bude, Made, and myself, we have all experienced simple possession, which fringes on fascination. It is important for us all to keep grounded, even collectively grounded, so that we can remain in simple possession and avoid subjugation. Thus I began speaking to ghosts that had entered the Made. The first one I identified was Cheung. He kept correcting my pronunciation of his name, so Cheung is just the one I settled on. Cheung was a teenage boy of Chinese descent. He didn't seem particularly malevolent, although any malevolent possession will hurt the host, and I think of it as being like a kitten in a small paper bag. Their claws will inevitably rip and tear the bag. He explained that he had died in his home when his home had been set alight in the anti-Chinese riots, during which time his sister was raped before his eyes. Peresitawa 1998 were incidents of demonstrations, civil unrest and mass violence, largely but not exclusively against Chinese Indonesians, mainly in Medan, North Sumatra, 4th to the 8th of March, Jakarta, 12th to the 15th of May, and Solo, 13th to the 15th of May. These were a reaction to the eventual failure of Suharto's economy, not so much as its economic strategy, which had been created by the Berkeley boys, gifted Indonesian academics sent to study at Berkeley University as a part of the CIA's anti-communist activities, nor the loans from Western multinational organisations, including the IMF, World Bank and UNDP. No, the economic failure was a result of massive unequal distribution created by corruption and unbridled oligopolistic tendencies. Central to Suharto's economic system was the promotion of his Chukong. These were Chinese business people, the most famous being Lim So Leong, Bob Hassan and Oi T Keong, who allegedly paid him generously for monopolistic positions still dominating the Indonesian economy today. Indeed, there are few industrial supply chains in Indonesia without a monopolistic position in existence somewhere, which sustains inequalities regardless of government attempts to reduce them. It could be argued that the origins of this system lie in the establishment of the opium trade in Indonesia by the Dutch. In Jakarta, at least, the rioters targeted Chinese businesses, more so than the Chinese themselves. Ultimately, these riots led to Suharto's deposal, an action which nearly half of all Indonesians still deeply regret. Our country's history has proven Suharto's good deeds and kindness throughout 32 years of his era. A lot of people still miss and pray for him. Siti Hediati Hejadi, President Suharto's politician daughter. Whilst Cheung seemed prepared to accept that Maddie was a good person and that he really should not cause her any harm, he kept repeating that she was Javanese. It would seem that the Javanese were seen as perpetrators of these riots, although I suspect this was simply shorthand for Pribumi. It also seemed to me that the Javanese from the Jogja region were the least likely to be involved, and that the Sunda were the more likely perpetrators. Indeed, there is substantial, albeit disputed evidence, that much of the violence was perpetrated by Preman, gangster vigilantes, and especially the Front Prambella Islam and Primuda Pancasila. At the time of writing, our Chinese governor, Ahok, had just lost the election and had been imprisoned for 2 years, despite reports that the anti-Ahok demonstrations were made up with people from Java. I had only been aware of Sunda people from Java Barat and Banten. In other words, not people registered to vote in Jakarta. Cheung was from Jakarta and therefore would make the distinction between the Javanese and the Sunda of Java Barat and Banten. But Indonesians from the other islands, particularly to the east, the Javanese simply signifies all that is wrong with Indonesia. When I visit Bali, both Bulays and the Balinese find it incredible that I live in Java, which they believe to be the centre of conservative Islam and authoritarian attitudes. Cheung followed me to the masjid that Friday. I was a little shocked, as I'd assumed that a ghost, especially a Chinese ghost, would never enter the masjid. During Pa Ustad's address, I continued to speak to Cheung, although naturally not during the actual Shaulat. After Shaulat, I had not walked more than 15 metres, and I turned the corner and was on the road which leads to the gangs my home is off, when I became aware of a much more powerful and sinister force. As always, I asked the ghost his name, and he told me that I should call him Cheung. He appeared to be mocking me in my newfound powers, and clearly saw himself in a power struggle with me. He was almost threatening, which is why I started to use my threatening style in my communications, but in my experience this doesn't work. It is said that if you are good, with good thoughts, a ghost cannot harm you. So they will attempt to make you angry and seek revenge. You must avoid this. All things will only turn into a spiral of destruction. Overall, I believe that whilst we need to be wary of ghosts, we should also treat them as equals, never subservient nor authoritative. I also feel that my powers were only at an immature stage, so I'm less clear about the next parts to my story. I also believe that Cheung had purposely misled me. I began to call the ghost Su Cheung and realised that he was the mature Cheung, who hadn't died in the fire after all. Su Cheung seemed to prefer me to address him as the boy Cheung. He told me that this was because I was more compassionate when I did so. But it may have been that I had less power over the mature Su Cheung. A major breakthrough and something of a bombshell came when I asked the boy Cheung where his home had been that had been set alight. Here was his reply. I was expecting to say Glodok or Senin or one of the other centres of Chinese Indonesians in the city. Wait, so Su Cheung must be Ma's husband and therefore Ibu RTs' father? I was completely shocked, but now realise that I should have worked this out much sooner, as the living have much more power over their ancestors than unknown spirits. Despite this revelation, I am unable to find evidence of these riots affecting our immediate area, although major incidents occurred all around Jakarta on May the 14th, 1998. I also found that the term anti-Chinese riots is partially a Western misinterpretation, as the riots were more specifically aimed against Suharto's business interests, just as the riots of 1965-66 were mostly against communists and Kejawen practitioners and not Chinese Indonesians. There is substantial evidence, also hotly disputed, that at least in Jakarta the incidents were stoked by a power struggle within the army, with one faction led by Suharto's son-in-law. Indeed, there are unsubstantiated reports of renegades within Suharto's son-in-law's battalion focusing the mob on the Chinese and in the rape of Chinese women. Suharto's son-in-law stood against Jokowi in the presidential election, and some argue appears to have been the mastermind of the recent Ahok debacle, not least as he claimed Jokowi to be a Christian during the election, albeit that SBW has popularly emerged as most likely mastermind, and later events cast doubt on this, although not a potential involvement. Indeed, the politician, businessman and environmentalist Zulkifli Hassan has admitted to masterminding the political campaign, although in Indonesia one has to be circumspect in hearing such admissions. To the outside world, Suharto's son-in-law's image was not helped when Indonesian rock star Ahmad Dhani wore a replica jacket of the jacket worn by Heinrich Himmler in a music video in support of him prior to the presidential election. Bizarre though these episodes may seem, Jokowi is known for his like of Metallica and Napalm Death, and frequently receives memorabilia related to death metal from visiting foreign delegations. So when Su Cheung blames the Javanese, he is actually blaming Suharto's son-in-law's battalion, many of whom would have been Javanese. This would make more sense based on my knowledge of present-day South Jakarta, where the Chinese and Betawi mix freely with the Javanese. Whilst more insular, they didn't really dislike the Chinese, despite their cultural differences. That events from so long ago can still be influencing our torment, and that the perpetrators, whoever they may be, have never faced justice, really is a microcosm of contemporary Indonesia. I need to keep some balance in reporting what others have said, as many of my middle-class pre-Bumi friends are strong supporters of Suharto's son-in-law, who they see as the natural successor, Ratu Adil, to the order, national pride and economic miracle created by Suharto. On reflection, they all live in Tangerang, Banten, although I refuse to consider any spatial link with their political views. Although Banten and Java Barat are now strongholds of support for Suharto's son-in-law and conservative Islam, many Indonesians will argue that the country is so diverse with so many problems that there is a need for a strong man to lead it, and few could doubt Suharto or his son-in-law's credentials here. I lean towards more conspiratorial theories, which suggest that these problems are created by the strongmen and their supporters to fashion a power vacuum for them to fill. In the UK, I shun such conspiratorial theories, but since arriving in Indonesia, my experience tells me that the more convoluted and bizarre they appear, the more credence I need to give them. Readers who are even more pedantic than me, and for whom I must sympathise, will have identified an incongruity in my story. If Su Cheung is Ibu RTs' father, then the events of 1998 were too late for this to be true. So was he actually Ibu RTs' brother and was killed in the fire? The riots of 1965-66 would provide a better explanation, at least in terms of the timing. Those events are brilliantly portrayed in the docufilm The Act of Killing, which is banned in Indonesia and includes a vignette of the moderate previous and current Vice President Yusuf Kalla. One might even describe the film as a dark comedy if it weren't for the fact that the events it depicts were true. The events are also the background to the wonderful film The Year of Living Dangerously. I've checked, and our Kampung was indeed a satellite town to Jakarta in 1965, rather like Tangerang, Banten is today, although the scale of today's population make this a poor comparison. However, in Jakarta, the events were largely confined to infighting within the army and the arrest of known communists whose names were supplied by the US Embassy. Also, if our house was the scene of the fire and rape, 1965 to 66 would make more sense, as our house was definitely built or rebuilt prior to 1998. The main focus then moved to Java, where the targets were communists and Kejawen believers, with Nahdlatul Ulama, Muhammadiyah and Catholics supporting the army, which ironically was mostly Javanese. They later moved to Bali, where they did include some anti-Chinese sentiment, before moving to Sumatra, Sulawesi, Kalimantan, where Dayaks were targeted, and Nusa Tenggara, where the anti-Chinese backlash was much stronger. Nevertheless, despite being branded in the West as anti-Chinese riots, By far the greatest number of victims were communists and Kejawen, thought to be between 500,000 and 3 million, this upper figure being hotly disputed within Indonesia. Indeed, many would dispute that there were any victims at all. Finding reliable information on these events is problematic, as they brought with them the overthrow of Sukarno and the beginnings of Suharto's military dictatorship, or some have called it military bureaucratic state, reflecting the attempts to rationalise its dictatorial excesses. The Suharto regime banned the Communist Party and put the surviving members in prison. Recently, the Indonesian military made it mandatory for all members to watch the film Penguin Tankan G305 PKI, The Treachery of the Communists, despite it reputedly containing misinformation on the events behind Suharto's rise to power, which Norman Redway, MBE, CBE, at least repeated, if not invented. Nevertheless, the former president's son commented, "We cannot turn our backs on history. What's in the film is a true version of history, and nobody can change that." The regime also turned its attention to Chinese-Indonesians, banning Chinese languages and characters, which prior to independence had been amongst the most common languages in Jakarta. Indeed, prior to independence, Bahasa was only used in the ports for commerce and the islands by Singapore. They also encouraged ethnic Chinese to change their names to more Indonesian ones, which is part of the reason for the official underrepresentation of Chinese Indonesians. The true nature of these events were redacted from history, obscuring the major influence of the CIA, American, Australian and British media spread Suharto's propaganda, and rather bizarrely, Swedish rifles were thought to have aided the coup. Even in the West, the events were portrayed as a civil war, as reports were edited and even suppressed completely in Singapore. Indonesia was engaged in a surreptitious war with Britain in Borneo over the boundaries with the Federation of Malaysia, and there is substantial evidence that much of the information was concocted at MI6 propaganda centres in Hong Kong and Singapore, masterminded by Norman Redway. Indeed, it is possibly no coincidence that the supposed anti-communist riots occurred less than a year after Singapore's expulsion from the Federation of Malaysia due to anti-Chinese sentiment. Oh dear. I am not inadvertently suggesting that distrust of the Chinese Indonesians was manufactured by MI6, especially not when they seem so deep-rooted and primordial. I resolved to have it out with Ma. Why was our house guardian allowing her family to be used in this way? Wasn't she ashamed? But she wasn't there. In fact, I'd not been aware of her for some time. Su Cheung became more and more aggressive towards Maddie and towards me when we spoke. He had taken to hiding in our bathroom, and Maddie had many dreams about dirty water in our bathroom. Was it precognition, as this actually happened repeatedly, as our pump filter seemed unable to cope with soil from the well? My exchanges with Su Cheung were getting us nowhere, and appeared to be helping him and Pa RT in his plans. And the more that I threatened him, the more he threatened me. A breakthrough came when Su Cheung said he was more powerful than I, and that he could do far more than I ever could. My response was, on reflection, the best I could ever have used. Despite rarely being so quick-witted, I explained that real power came from love and respect, not abuse of one's economic position or physical strength. Su Cheung had no idea what I was talking about, just as even today few middle-class Indonesians would have any idea. That was it. Su Cheung had been an innocent young boy, whereas he became Su Cheung after the fire. He turned bitter and aggressive and started using black magic. Su Cheung was full of hatred and seeking revenge over the Javanese, but inside he was still the innocent teenager Cheung. Or am I mistaken, and Su Cheung is simply the malevolent side of Cheung? There was simply no point in getting involved in a macho power struggle. I should listen to my own words. Real power comes from love and respect, not abuse of one's economic position and physical strength. Once I had learned this lesson, Su Cheung changed, and I was able to ask him to stop tormenting Maddie and her sister. He said that he wanted to, but he couldn't, as piety would keep sending him. But that the episodes would be shorter. This meant that he'd return to piety more often and do him more harm than that which Buddy and Maddie were experiences. I asked Su Cheung many times about when the fire was and his relationship with Ibu RT, but I cannot seem to get an answer. Normal black magic spells only last for 40 days. If they've not worked during this time, they will not work at all. Possessions are more persistent and will continue possessing or attempting for 100 days before ending. The 100th day anniversary was coming, and we weren't entirely sure when everything started, but it had to by the time we arrived in Bali just after Christmas, so we knew it must be close. Rather like me being aware of major paranormal activity in our home prior to Pa Anggabaya's intervention, I was very aware of an increase in activity. Our home was safe, but things appeared to be coming to a head. With this head, my powers were increasing. Ever since arriving back in Indonesia in October the previous year, I'd had pains in my left shoulder. Of course, an economy flight and a journey lasting over 24 hours could provide a simple explanation, but these had been so persistent. Maybe they're simply an effect of the recurring flu-like symptoms that I have also suffered since returning, which included many sleepless nights, pouring with perspiration. I've taken to using oils in those areas I feel the most pain. I favour Gandapura, Indian wintergreen, but a balsam such as tiger balm would work equally well. The truth is, ghosts don't like heat, despite feeling hot being a sign of possession. So a good way of removing them from an area of your body is to use warming oils or balsams. Traditionally, Kajawan followers use aromatic oils like cendana, known as sandalwood in English, as sweet smells also appear to be effective, possibly by transplanting the malevolent with the benign. But don't use alcohol-based perfume. I've also taken to using an Ibu Pijat, massage lady, called Dukun Pijat in some parts of Indonesia. Being very British, I have never welcomed a stranger poking away at my body, but now I look forward to my regular manipulation. What I was beginning to understand was that my left arm and hand were the centre of my powers and also my possession. Some months previously, Maddie had bought a gas barbecue, and I was delighted as it provided a break from fried food. Indonesians really don't comprehend grilling, but do use barbecues for satay ayam and ikan bakar, grilled chicken and fish. I was preparing kebabs and burgers and cooking them outside. Buddy and Maddie were a little frightened of the barbecue with its small gas canister, which has a reputation for causing gas explosions. A Batak friend of mine is a major distributor of these canisters and claims it is always misfitting, not the manufacture, that causes the explosions. So when the barbecue stopped working, Maddie had immediately stored it away in a kitchen cupboard. Using my left hand, I identified this barbecue to be the source of our possessions. Of course, it had been outside, and it would have been simple for Pa Erte to put something inside it. In fact, that was probably what stopped it from working. Our stand-in maid stripped it down and found nothing, but the source could have been something flammable, such as paper, oil, flowers, or more sinisterly, oil from a grave. Much later, I discovered that Maddie's dirty water dream most likely suggests that Pa Erte has taken a personal item from her and placed it in a toilet. This is how he continued to launch his attacks. This leads me to question if Su Cheung was actually trying to tell me something by hiding in our bathroom. It would also lead me to wonder if Cheung and Su Cheung are simply metaphors in a narrative I am still exploring, which allows me to understand the balance of good and evil and my right and left-hand path that is in each of us. As Maddie had also dreamt of babies, this suggests that Pa Erte has cast a spell on an item of clothing, undoubtedly a Makena, but although Maddie's dreams are often not so allegorical. Maddie dreamt that Yuni's wife had placed something on our wall of our yard, and she had appeared black and sinister. I ran my hand along the wall, but there was nothing. I then ran it above the ground next to the wall and felt nothing, and finally I turned my attention to the rubbish bin and knew that whatever Annie had placed was now there. I was getting good at this and returned to the barbecue in the kitchen cupboard. A warm jolt, not unlike electricity, ran up my arm. Had I any doubts, all were gone. I ran into Titi's and then Widiati's room to feel along the adjoining walls with Yuni's house. Yes, I could feel something, but it was low level, indicating that black magic was being used, but not that an object had been placed nearby to harm us. Lima was at our home that night and appeared completely amazed that this bulle appeared to have the sort of powers she spends a tenth of her income on. I repeated my exploration with my left hand and asked Lima to do the same. Yes, she felt something in the bin, but was gobsmacked at the power coming from the barbecue and felt nothing on Titi and Widiati's walls. Whilst in our yard I could hear Pa Erte and Ibu RT. I could not really hear what was being said, and with it being in Bahasa mixed with Betawi, was unlikely to understand something at such low volume. But I knew that they were discussing what to do next. Ibu RT said that she could not go on any longer. She was ill from the ghosts constantly returning to her, and she begged Pa Erte to stop. I ran into the bathroom and commanded Su Cheung to stop, even though I had found this not to be the best tactic. To my surprise, he said that he would. Could I trust him? I ran into the front room. Ma was there, and I told her that it had to stop. She had no power. Had she no powers over her husband? She explained to me that whilst no longer Muslim, she was Indonesian, Betawi in fact, and could not disobey her husband, but yes, she had some influence. I asked what was happening between her daughter and her husband. Ma confirmed that Ibu RT was not going to send anything to us again and was pleading with her husband to stop. To my surprise, Su Cheung joined us in the front room. I keep asking for an update on the discussion. It appeared to be positive, and Pa Erte would stop. Su Cheung explained that he'd had enough and did not want to obey his son-in-law, but could not disobey certain commands. This went on for about 2 hours, when Ma expressed concern that although Pa Erte had agreed to stop, he could not be trusted. Both Ma and Su Cheung seemed to be fearful of their son-in-law. Maddie told me that my behaviour was frightening everyone and that I had to learn to keep things to myself. She stopped sharing what was happening with me and claiming she felt nothing when she was clearly unwell. Did she think I was going mad? Was I? Well, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. By all means, feel free to comment on it, including criticism, as that's the only way I can improve. Now, I really do hate it when channels keep badgering you to subscribe for them. But I suppose it does tell you when I'm going to post new chapters. I'm aiming to do this every week to 10 days, so it might be a good idea to subscribe if you want to. But thank you again for listening.